Welcome to Cuz We're Nerds, the show that covers trends in comics, movies, video games, board games, and much more. Caleb's on assignment in Manhattan, so this week I'm your host, Chris. Today I'm talking about anime. But wait a second, didn't we already do an episode on anime? How's this one going to be any different? Well, you'll find out in this week's episode of Cuz We're Nerds. So I haven't actually done two solo episodes in a row before. I kind of try to space them out, alternate them between solo and group episodes, but you know, due to reasons that are far too grim for this podcast, I'm socially isolating myself. Hopefully, you folks are doing the same, and if you are, you might have a bit more spare time than normal. So I wanted to take this time to suggest some, different anime from the ones that we've suggested before. If you didn't listen to episode 27 way back when, Caleb and Zach both suggested a bunch of great starter anime. The thing is that those shows have fighting as like a central drive, either for conflict resolution or as a way to progress the characters in the plot. And not every show is like that, and not everyone is interested in it. That you'd be forgiven for thinking that all anime is like that because the popular ones that you see in our culture, like Dragon Ball Z, are all about fighting. But there are so many other genres within anime, and that doesn't necessarily mean that the ones that they talked about are bad, because some of the ones that they talked about are easily my favorites of all time. Yu Yu Hakusho, uh, Cowboy Bebop, Bakano are some of the only anime that I've ever rewatched because they're just that good and that solid. And the other ones that they mentioned, My Hero Academia, One Punch Man, Gurren Lagann, Kill la Kill, Afro Samurai, those are all definitely worth checking out as well if the premises from that episode interest you. But I wanted to talk about some anime that don't have fighting as a main focus. Sure, sometimes there are fights, either for dramatic or comedic effect, but they're not the core of the show because not everyone is into that. And the shows that I'm going to talk about cover a bunch of genres, but they don't cover all of them. And I'll get into a little bit of the ones that they don't cover later. Um, and Also, they're all dubbed. Well, okay, except one notable exception and one that I recommend watching subbed for technical reasons, not because I think the dub is bad. I don't care how you watch anime, as long as you're interacting with the medium and getting something out of the art form. You could watch it however you want. I'm not a purist. I watch it dubbed most of the time because it means I can do something else. But when it comes down to really really good shows, I will sit down and I will watch them subbed because sometimes they're worth it. And hopefully, some of the ones that I'm going to talk about today interest you enough to check them out. And you might have your own recommendations, and if you do, I'd love to hear them because I haven't watched everything that's out there, and that is something that I will never be able to complete in my lifetime. But I'm always interested in finding more and more interesting things to watch. Now, I'm not going to be covering movies, but there are a lot of great movies that you should definitely check out. Anything from Studio Ghibli or Your Name was a super big one the past couple of years, and I want to eat your pancreas, and I think there's another one that I can't think of off the top of my head, but those are worth checking out as well if you have the time. But that's not what this episode is going to be covering. Another thing about these shows is that they're either finished or only have a few seasons, or are only going to have a few seasons because of their limited source material. So it's not going to be like One Piece where there's 900 plus episodes for you to get into. These are going to be pretty short. That said, my first recommendation and the oldest is also the longest, clocking in at 5 seasons. It's a show called Initial D. So Initial D follows Takumi Fujiwara, a high school student who secretly delivers orders for his dad's tofu shop using his dad's car, even though he's not old enough to drive yet. When a local street racing team gets bested by said car and tracks down Takumi's dad, they beg him to join their team in an upcoming race against the Red Suns, a local famous street racing team. Takumi's dad refuses, but sends Takumi to the race in his place. After the race, Takumi gradually learns to love street racing against different opponents with unique conditions and styles and in different locations all over Japan. Now, you may have dismissed this show already because you're not a car person. And I totally get that. My most interactions with like car media for a long time had just been the Fast and the Furious. So yeah, I'm not a big car person either, but I love Initial D. Like it really got its teeth into me. Um, Show's like 20 years old now, but it definitely still holds up. The way the races are portrayed are very entertaining, and they do a good job of a classic anime mechanic of having spectators explain what's going on and why you should be impressed with what's happening. And even though the animation can look a little dated because I mean, it is, um, the soundtrack is awesome. The show uses like a unique Eurobeat track, which isn't a genre I knew existed, but they're different ones for each race, and they each give races their own character and cadence and flow. And the dub is also good despite its age. It has a large cast of characters that show up over all of the seasons and one of the interstitial movies. Um, Now the fifth season isn't dubbed yet, and it might never be considering how long it's been. But that still shouldn't keep you from giving the show a shot. That said, when you take a look for the show, you'll probably find some movies that cover the first couple of seasons. I'm gonna go ahead and tell you not to watch those, not because they aren't good, they're okay. The issue is that they use, like, generic rock music that sort of takes away a lot of the character and flavor, of the show proper, instead of the unique Eurobeat tracks that were, constructed just for the show. So, while they're okay, I would still recommend watching the actual show itself. Okay, so next up, second oldest on this list is a show called Orin High School Host Club. This one requires a bit of context because in the U.S. we don't have host clubs, and the show kind of goes 0 to 60 really quick. So the host club is kind of a lounge in Japan that employs male staff to attend to women. Giving them drinks, meals, attentive conversation. It's basically like paying someone to flirt with you for an evening. Um, so you might be asking, why the heck does a high school have one? And it's a super duper like ritzy rich academy. And six boys started the club to sort of like use it to entertain the other girls at the academy that, as the show puts it, have nothing better to do with their afternoons. Um, the main character, Haruhi Fujioka, is a normal student who's at the school on a scholarship. She sort of stumbles into the host club when looking for a place to study, accidentally breaks a very expensive vase, and the host club members, mistaking her for a boy, put her to work for the club to pay back the value of the vase. The show is as ridiculous as its premise sounds. The boys very quickly figure out that she's a girl, but she has to give the charade during school or she won't be able to pay off her debt. And it sort of takes a really aggressive look at anime tropes, turns them up to 11 to just like really lampoon them. Um, and also leans super hard into the flirty romance angle, making the show like more camp than drama. It's actually also animated by Studio Bones, who is a studio that I could go on forever about. But they animate some of the most famous shows like Full Metal Alchemist and My Hero Academia. They're industry veterans and they use their skills to shift animation techniques as needed to get just the that much more out of a lot of the jokes in the script. It's definitely worth checking out if you want something to have a good laugh to. So the next one I want to talk about is a very recent obsession of mine. It's called Haikyuu. Short kid Shoyo Hinata is inspired to play volleyball after seeing a local legend named the Tiny Giant compete in the high school national championships. After practicing every day in middle school, he finally gets enough players from other sports onto a school volleyball team to play in the last local middle school tournament. Even though he is able to, really like carry his team and put on an impressive display with just his skills alone, he gets absolutely crushed by a team whose star player is called the King of the Court, because he's just some sort of like volleyball prodigy. Later that year, he gets into Karasuno High, the same high school that the Tiny Giant played for, and excitedly joins the volleyball team, only to find out that the King of the Court is going to be his teammate. Now, this show is similar to Initial D in the sense that I cared even less about volleyball than I did about street racing when I started watching it. Um, but I have to say that the action and the characterization and the character growth for this show are all ridiculously compelling. Even though Karasuno's roster expands over the course of the show, you get to spend time with not just those characters, but opponents and their motivations. And you get to see Karasuno's team from the perspective of those opponents or other students at Karasuno, not just the main characters. And it's also got like a really great soundtrack and pretty good animation. It it does a really good job of putting in extra animation where it counts to make things look really good. The pacing is great. A lot of the way that the games are done is like they're over in like one or two episodes, and because it's a sports show, it does have like a tournament structure sometimes. But you're not just in tournaments all season. You're actually spending time with the characters in school, and it's a very very cool show. So one of the things with sports anime that I never really liked is when they become more anime than sports, by adding power levels or special techniques. Haikyuu stays pretty grounded. You can actually find real life clips of actual volleyball games that the show clearly took inspiration from. One of the other things that I really enjoy about not just Haikyuu but Initial D is that because the stakes aren't about saving the world or people's lives aren't on the line here, the characters can lose, and that's not something you see in a lot of other anime. And more than that, like not only can they lose, but they get the opportunity to learn and grow from those losses. And Haikyuu especially does a great job of getting you involved in the emotional stakes, while also using the same thing that Initial D does by getting spectators to explain the strategy and the rules behind what's going on, while not making it feel like some sort of lecture on why volleyball is great. The next show that I want to talk about is a show called Fruits Basket. Now, Fruits Basket might have been a name that you've heard. It's been around for a while. It was originally produced as an anime in the early 2000s, but the show quickly caught up with the manga it was based on and sort of did its own thing for the second half. And now the manga's finished, and so they've gone back and started it from the ground up. And there's actually something similar happened with Full Metal Alchemist, the original show, which is definitely worth checking out, but also the readaptation called Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, um, also worth checking out. But they're not on the list because the whole fighting thing that I explained at the beginning of the show. Anyway, Fruits Basket 2019, as it's called, to separate it from the original run. is a show that revolves around a high school student called Toru Honda. She's recently orphaned, and she suddenly finds herself living with the Soma family, a large family that has a pretty unique secret. Certain members of the family are cursed, and whenever they're hugged by a member of the opposite sex, they turn into one of the 12 animals of the Chinese zodiac, or a cat in the case of one dude. Um, it's it's a romantic show, not just because there's a bit of a romantic subplot between Toru and the two main boys of the Soma household, but in the sense that the show is extremely idealistic. It's a show about mindset and how much of a positive influence the right person can be on not just one person, but those around them. It's got a large but very memorable cast of characters, and the humor is pretty solid. Um, it's not quite a slice of life show because magical zodiac people, but it's still pretty tame and comforting. And they actually they brought back the already stellar cast of the original dub and added in even more uh, impressive voice actors and actresses, and it's definitely worth checking out if you want something a bit lighthearted and something that that feels good in these trying times. The last two shows I want to talk about are ones that I recommend watching subbed. All the other ones that I've talked about so far you can find dubbed, and I actually recommend watching them dubbed because the dubs are good. But these last two shows, one of them doesn't even have a dub yet, but the other, K-On!, I recommend watching subbed because the dub just doesn't quite work. Now, don't get me wrong, the dub cast is stacked with great talent, and they did a great job. But there's one of the main draws with the show that the dub just doesn't sort of jive with, and that is the music. So K-On! Is a show that follows Yui Hirasawa, an impulsive and easily distracted high school student, as she joins the school's music club to help them meet the minimum members required, even though she doesn't actually play an instrument. Now, the show's like a slice of life comedy that follows the girls as they become a band, and it's as cute as it is funny. The music is top notch, and in the Japanese show, all the songs are sung by the characters' voice actresses. But with the dub, it switches to Japanese whenever they're supposed to be singing, and it's actually pretty jarring. So that's why I recommend watching it subbed. K-On's also one of the shows that was done by the critically acclaimed studio Kyoto Animation, or KyoAni as it's affectionately called, which unfortunately has been on indefinite hiatus after they were the target of an arson attack that killed 33 of their staff. If you weren't aware of the KyoAni fire or how impressive the fan response was to get money and donations to the families of those affected by the fire at the studio, that's definitely something you should try and find some info on. Um, but it's clear from that the studio and their work meant a lot of things to a lot of different people, and um, this is definitely one of their best works, in my opinion, and it's worth checking out. At the heart of it, it's a show about cute anime girls doing cute anime girl things, but it's fun. It's actually one of the shows that I refuse to finish, which is a weird sense of praise, but it and Parks and Rec and probably eventually Brooklyn Nine-Nine are shows that I just have such like a deep emotional connection to the characters that if I don't ever finish it, it's not actually done, you know. And so that's how important the show is to at least to me, and it's definitely worth taking some time to track it down and take a look at it. Finally, I want to talk about Kaguya-sama: Love Is War. This is the show that doesn't have a dub yet. I'm not sure if it ever will, but this show is just an absolute trip. The show's an intellectual chess match of ridiculous proportions between Kaguya Shinomiya and Miyuki Shirogane, the two highest ranking members of Shuchen Academy's student council. So they both have a crush on each other, but each of them believes that whoever admits it first will forever be the weaker person in the relationship. The episodes are made up of two 12-minute ish long mini stories, and each one involves a very normal premise and increasingly ridiculous turns of events as the two try to trick the other one into confessing their affection, um, with other characters throwing serious wrenches into the dynamic, and it's absolutely hysterical. It's visually stunning and unique, and was easily one of the most popular animes of 2019. I'm not, like I said, I'm not sure if they're going to be getting a dub if they haven't at this point. I think there's a second season on the way. I'm not sure, but there's tons of more manga material to check out. Now, I joke uh, sometimes that this show is the intellectual thriller that Death Note tried to be, but there is a lot of truth to that, in that every single turn of events and character reactions are really really well thought out and really make sense for the people involved, and everything is portrayed in a very unique and crisp and clever manner, and it's definitely worth checking out. I think it only has like 12 episodes in its first season. It's short, it's funny, it's definitely something that if you think you would enjoy it from the sound of it, that you should definitely track down. Now, this episode isn't sponsored by Hulu, but it turns out that everything I've mentioned is on there. Even some of the stuff from the previous anime episode, like Yu Yu Hakusho, Cowboy Bebop, and One Punch Man, are on there as well. You can find these in different places, but Hulu is the best, consolidated spot, at least in the U.S., for people to check these out. You also probably noticed that all the shows I brought up sort of focus on high schoolers. It's just one of those things with anime. Most of them are geared towards high school age kids, and it's also kind of like it's a universal experience in and out of Japan, even though their school system is structured a little bit differently. And it's an easy place to just inject various types of conflicts and characters. So it's a very ubiquitous setting. um, actually aren't that many anime that I can think of off the top of my head that aren't heavily fantasy or sci-fi that don't take place in high school, um, and also ones that fit the previous premise of this episode, that they don't really focus around physical violence. Um, Carol and Tuesday, which is a music-focused one made by the same director of Cowboy Bebop, is one of the few that I can think of. Now there are other genres like fantasy and sci-fi that I haven't really gone into. Steins Gate is a sci-fi show that I've heard a lot about, but I actually haven't finished. Carol and Tuesday I haven't finished myself either, so I don't feel okay recommending them. But if Steins Gate, which from my understanding, is like time travel nonsense, and Carol and Tuesday, which, like I said, is music focused, kind of strike your fancy, you should definitely check those out too. But since, like I said, since I haven't finished them, I personally can't recommend them. Do you know who I do recommend? That's right, Taylor Poole. I'm gonna really need to find somebody else to help me with these segues. Otherwise, it'll be like a weird children's show call and response thing, which is not the direction I want to take this podcast. But whatever. Taylor did our theme music. You can check him out over at taylorpoolemusic.com. That's TAYLORPOOLE music.com. I really hope that this list gives you something to take your mind off how crazy the past few weeks have been, and how crazy the future few weeks are likely going to be. You can find me at twitch.tv/C&C Power Hour. That's C, the letter N, C Power Hour, where my friends and I stream Magic the Gathering and video games all throughout the week. You can also check out our website, cuzwerenerds.com, for past episodes and new releases. That, again, is cuzwerenerds.com, CUZWERENERDS. Thanks for listening to this episode of Cuz We're Nerds. Stay up to date with all the nerdy news and podcast drops by following us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also leave us comments and feedback over at cuzwerenerds@gmail.com. That's cuzwerenerds@gmail.com. Finally, if you enjoyed this podcast, we would really appreciate it if you left us a review on iTunes or told your friends about us. And as always, stay nerdy.